Hello and welcome to Stay for Dinner, a podcast of cooking, curiosity, and conversation. If you love cooking, you hate cooking, you have no idea how you even feel about cooking because you have never tried it before, congratulations, you are in the right place. I am DC Pierson. I am your host. I'm a comedian, author, an enthusiastic home cook, and today my guest for this post-election week installment is Whitney Pastorek, former writer and critic for Entertainment Weekly, current music manager in Nashville, Tennessee, and even more current project lead for World Central Kitchen, José Andrés' amazing charity that has been feeding people and keeping restaurants going throughout the entire pandemic, and also a leader at Swing Left, I believe, in Tennessee as well. So she had a fascinating arc this entire pandemic into election season. We will talk about that. We will talk about just local politics and democracy and food and all of this different stuff. I really, really enjoyed talking to Whitney. It was the perfect sort of post, like I said, or kind of during election week when we were talking. You'll hear we're sort of balanced in that stochastic or whatever you would call it, just weird place that we've all been in and are still in or whatever. But I really, really enjoyed talking to her. It was very exciting. And we're going to get into it right after I make Shimeji mushroom rice. This is a recipe from the book, the Gaijin Cookbook by Ivan Orkin. And it is a book all about sort of being an outsider to Japanese cuisine. Ivan Orkin is the founder of Ivan Ramen, the group of restaurants in New York City, amazing artisanal ramen maker, and I, like him, am also an outsider to Japanese cuisine, and the cookbook is really cool. I've enjoyed it a lot. I haven't dived into it as much as I wanted to, but now that it's starting to get a little more fall-like, there's a lot of comfort food-y recipes in here that I am dying to try, so I am gonna make this one. This one is part of a little subsection in the book called clay pot mixed rice, also known as Tikakomi Gohan, and basically the idea is that you soak some rice, you put some stuff in it, you cook it for a little while, and then all the stuff is cooked. It's kind of like, it's just like one pot cooking sort of situation. So a good combination of warm, comfort foodie, and also just a minimum of effort and dishes, all of which makes total sense to me. Basically what I'm going to be making here is some rice that we're going to soak in some flavorful liquid and then throw some mushrooms in and then cook it for a little while, and then that's going to be it. And we're going to top it with a bunch of stuff, and I'm really, as I think I catch myself often saying, but is true, I'm excited about it. I am excited about it. So let's get into it. There's not a whole lot to do, so let's do what there is to do, and then I'll talk to Whitney. First of all, quick check of my ingredients. We're looking at 1.5 cups of Japanese short grain rice, 3 tablespoons of soy sauce, got that, 2 tablespoons of mirin, 2 tablespoons of sake, got that. Optionally, 1/4 cup of loosely packed katsuboshi or bonito flake, have those. It calls for 3 ounces of shimeji mushrooms, which are a really, really cool, long, skinny mushroom that they come in like a little cluster usually. We had a lot of them over the summer. Very frequently we would put them in stir fries and fried rices and all kinds of different stuff. Ironically enough, don't have any right now. Instead, I have a combination of chestnut mushrooms and oyster mushrooms. So I'm going to be using those instead. And then we are going to garnish with 3 scallions. It calls for also some shiso leaves. I don't have those. I do have, however, 1-inch piece of ginger that we'll be cutting into matchsticks. Don't have umeboshi, unfortunately, which it also describes as optional, which is good because I don't have them. And then some shredded nori or seaweed, which I do have, and I'm going to sprinkle over the top at the end. First things first, we are going to rinse our 1.5 cups of rice in a few changes of water. Basically just putting it in a bowl or a pot, the pot that I'm going to be using in this case, the Dutch oven, and then just As it says in the recipe, place the rice in a fine mesh strainer and rinse under cold water, using your fingers to agitate the rice until the water runs almost clear. Or alternatively, yeah, that's how you say that. Place the rice in a pot or bowl and rinse and drain away the water 3 times. I'm going to do that last one. This will be a step that will not be unfamiliar to anyone that has ever done any recipe related to rice. And also, I did not mention it before, but this is going to make about 4 servings. It's my second change of water. And my third change. It's always a little bit of a challenge to not pour any of the rice off as you are draining the liquid. That's kind of fun. All right, 3 changes of water, and you can see the starch sort of roll off of it. I think that's the idea, just to get rid of a little bit, some of that excess starch. Now we are going to soak the rice. It says transfer it into your 1.5 quart enamel glazed cast iron pot or similarly sized saucepan or danabe. I believe the danabe is the like traditional clay pot that seems like amazing to cook in. I don't have one. We just have a little Dutch oven here that we're going to be using. And add the soy sauce, mirin, sake, and 1 1/4 cups of water. Sprinkle the katsuobushi over top if using, and we're going to chop those up before we do that. So I am in fact going to do that. But first, 1 cup of water, 1/4 cup of water, 2 tablespoons of mirin, 3 of soy sauce. And when you're putting this sauce together for the liquid that the rice is going to be cooked in, you just know, like, this is going to be really flavorful. And the 2 tablespoons of sake. Have all of that in with the rice, and then I'm going to quickly chop up like a 1/4 cup of, or finely chop rather, 1/4 cup of katsuobushi. And if you've never worked with katsuobushi before, it's just dried and flaky bonito, which is a fish, and it's super smoky, like the scent of it. It's really, really, it's a little bit fishy, obviously, because it's made of fish. And cats love it. You might even buy it as a literal cat treat. We certainly have before. I genuinely don't know if you can then just go ahead and use it in food. I would recommend only using the kind that you buy like for humans at the grocery store in the human section. All right, got the katsuobushi chopped up. Sprinkle it over the top of my rice here. This is going to be hugely reductive, but I feel like when I first started cooking anything Japanese, and you would make dashi either by using a powder or by using kombu and katsuobushi, and then you, even just smelling it as you're making it, it's one of those aha moments where you go like, oh, this is such a foundational flavor in what I think of as the sort of like a very typical Japanese flavor profile. It was a real like light bulb moment. And now we're going to let this rice soak for 20 minutes in this liquid. And it already smells really good. And while I do that, I'm going to prepare my other toppings here. Both of the kinds of mushrooms I bought are kind of, again, in a little patch or pod where they're all stuck together. These oyster mushrooms look super cool. It's almost like, just looking at them from below, it looks like an album cover or like some fantasy psychedelic art from the 70s. It looks awesome. I'm going to go ahead and separate them into their individual mushrooms after cutting off the bottom of the cluster where the roots or whatever it's called for mushrooms probably were. Yeah, having a little bit of a phantom thread moment here, looking at these very kind of wild looking mushrooms on my cutting board here, but the intent is not to poison anyone, to make them realize how much they need us. The intent is to just delight. But good movie though. Have mushrooms ever looked better? All right, now I'm going to chop these scallions. The one thing I'm realizing that's cool about this recipe, if you left out the katsuobushi, it is vegan. And then I think, so that's my scallions. I think the only other amazing I have to do is cutting some ginger into matchsticks. Peeling the ginger by doing the trick I never tire of talking about, which is using a spoon. All right, got it peeled now. I'm just gonna cut it into matchsticks by slicing it into like sheets. Slicing those sheets into thin little matchsticks. That's what we're doing. All right, the rice has been soaking for about 20 minutes. Like I said, I could let it go as long as an hour, but I'm gonna go ahead and get it going. And that is by bringing it to a simmer over medium heat. Then we're gonna lower the heat and throw the top back on. Oh, and before I forget, throw in the mushrooms now. Ultimately, I may have more mushrooms than is dictated by the recipe. I'm going to throw the chestnuts in first because they're smaller and they're more kind of like the Shimeji. And then we'll see how much room we have here for oyster mushrooms. So I'm bringing it to simmer, stirring around a little bit to keep the rice from sticking or clumping, as it says. And ultimately, I did all my chestnuts and most of my oyster mushrooms. All right, now we're simmering, aka lots of little bubbles and lots of little places. So I'm going to go ahead and throw the top on and lower the heat to low. We're going to cook for 14 minutes, a delightfully specific amount of time. All right, that's been 14 minutes. So now I am going to turn the heat off, open it, and then get in and it says fluff it with a fork or spoon or anything like that, and then recover and let it sit for about 5 minutes. And just out of curiosity, I'm going to, rice, some of the rice is still a little just on this side of undercooked. It has 5 minutes to steam in there, covered, that will take care of it. I mean, usually I feel like there's almost always a period in most stovetop rice cooking where you're covering it and letting it steam at the end. So hopefully that'll take care of it. All right, so I ended up letting this stand for actually a bit longer than 5 minutes just because I just wanted to make sure that it's cooked. I'm gonna take another little taste here. And the rice seems to range from completely cooked through to a little chewy. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna wait about 5 minutes, 5 more minutes. It's still, the cooker is still really warm here on the stove, even though the heat's off. Just let it sit for another 5 minutes, and then I'm gonna stir in my garnishes, which are the scallions and the slivered ginger. And then that's gonna be it. Then I'm gonna eat it. I was thinking it might even be good with like a little egg or something, honestly, like a soft-boiled egg. So we'll see what I get up to with that. But in the meantime, please, so I would just say, if you end up making this recipe, you may want to cook the rice for a little bit closer to what it says in terms of package directions, or just let it stand at the end. But your mileage may vary on this one, I guess is what I will say. But regardless, I'm glad I tried it. It's definitely a method I would like to do more in the future. And speaking of the future, I really enjoyed this conversation with Whitney Pastorek about her experiences in the election, in the pandemic, in trying to keep restaurant employees in Nashville employed, as well as, changing the fabric of local politics, and most importantly, just in general, getting people involved. And I think we'll enjoy it too. So go ahead, check it out. Whitney Pastorek, here we go. So we should say we are recording on Friday, November 6th. So when you're listening to this, dates still have some vague relationship to meaning, but not much. Everyone is still in this insane state of election limbo. So if you're listening to this and we seem either overly nervous or overly optimistic compared to where everything's at when you're listening to this, please understand that's why we are in the Schrodinger's cat of democracy phase of this, and we'll see what happens. And I was saying before we started, like, I'm exhausted and I haven't even really done anything except for some light phone banking earlier in the week. And other than that, it's just been refreshing social media, like that's going to help, or like I can control anything by doing that. You have actually been doing a ton of stuff. So I can only imagine like that, that eating, actually finding some time to eat real food would be an accomplishment. Insofar as you can say, what has this week been like for you? What have you been doing? You, just from the outside, it seems like you're involved in so many different like efforts on so many different levels. Can you just like take us through that download in you know, as much as you want to, cause you know, I'd love to, just even if it's just to vent.
Yeah, no, I don't have a lot to vent about, but I'm going to warn you, and also I was going to say viewing audience, but I suppose listening audience. And it's good that no one's viewing me, because while I've eaten, I've not showered. I am working on about 6 brain cells, and at least one of them has a pronounced limp. So we're gonna do our best over here to keep it together long enough to sound coherent. But yeah, so this week was the culmination of months of work on 2 different jobs that I've been doing simultaneously, aside from the other jobs that I also am doing simultaneously. So for context, for people who have no idea who I am, I was previously working in the music business here in Nashville. And when the pandemic happened, I got laid off from a job as a manager at a big music management conglomerate back in April, I guess. Time has lost all meaning, as we've stated previously. Schrodinger's cat got laid off. And I didn't know what I was going to do. And I kind of was fiddling around for a bit, and then the floodgates kind of opened, and I ended up with just a zillion jobs, none of which I wanted to say no to. And the first one that came through was as the Nashville project lead for World Central Kitchen. And World Central Kitchen, for those who aren't familiar, you should get familiar. It is truly one of the most purely good organizations working in the world right now. It was founded by Chef José Andrés, who's a Washington, D.C. based, I guess we'll call him a celebrity chef, but he so transcends this kind of pithy phrase at this point. And, you know, the organization, it's a hunger relief organization, but it was originally sort of set up to activate in the wake of disasters. So hurricanes, earthquakes, wildfires. You know, when Dorian blew through the Bahamas, they were there. When the hurricane went through Puerto Rico, they were there. When the fertilizer plant exploded in Beirut, they were there. Those kinds of things. And then in the wake of the pandemic, you know, Chef and the team realized that it wasn't just that people were going to be experiencing increased food insecurity. It was that restaurants were going to also just start going out of business. And so they started thinking about ways to help, obviously, both with hunger relief in communities, COVID-related hunger relief, but also a way to help the restaurant community, because they are a NGO that was founded by a chef and has always been fueled by the work of chefs in restaurants. So they started this thing called Chefs for America, Restaurants for the People, where the idea is that we pay restaurants to make food for people in need. So rather than delivering a box of dry goods, a box of produce, canned food, setting up a soup kitchen is not something we can do due to COVID. We have local restaurants make and individually package complete restaurant quality meals, like high-end stuff. And then we get those meals in the hands of recipients and communities who can distribute them to people who have been impacted by the pandemic. It's a genius model. And we're paying the restaurants enough so that they're not just covering the cost of food. It's so that they can help pay their rent. They can bring staff back on. They can cover utilities and anything else that can come up. So it's much a relief program for the restaurants as it is for the people who receive the meals. So I started doing that in May here in Nashville. It was great. We did it for a couple months. It, you know, kind of that seemed to be the end of it. And so at some point in July, as my World Central Kitchen work here was waning, My friend Lisa, who happens to be the chief of staff for Congressman Jim Cooper, who's our U.S. House representative here in Tennessee, District 5, Nashville, she said, hey, I am looking at the election this fall, and I think we've got a problem. She said, with this pandemic, we are really worried about how that's going to impact people's ability to vote. And here in Tennessee, we don't have no excuse absentee balloting. So you traditionally have not been able to say, well, I'll just request a mail-in ballot. It's cool. You've had to have an excuse. You had to be over a certain age. You had to be, ill, hospitalized. You had to be out of the county, a couple other excuses. But generally, it's been fairly restrictive who could vote absentee in the state of Tennessee. So knowing that people were going to have to show up to vote in person, we also at the time had another law in the books that said that if you were voting for the first time, if you'd never voted before, you had to vote in person. And as we were looking at all the voter registration work that so many amazing groups have done here in Tennessee and obviously around the country, we knew we were going to have a lot of first-time voters. I mean, even just all the people Taylor Swift signed up, we knew we were going to have a lot of first-time voters who at the time were going to need to legally vote on the machines. So how do we do that? And how do we keep it from being just utter pandemonium on election day, looking at the potential for people's voices to be not heard and for their votes to be suppressed? And so the idea was we would start this thing called Vote Early TN, and we would get everybody in town, not just the political people, not just the civic organizations, but restaurants and plant stores and the hockey team and the pet rescue place and everybody you could imagine to adopt a day of early voting. Because the one thing we do have in Tennessee is 14 days of early voting. And so we then laid out the calendar, got all these people on board, and started pushing towards these themed days. So first day was Pride at the polls. There was a day that was the Preds at the polls for the hockey team. There was pets at the polls. They weren't all alliterative. But so she came to me in July, said, do you want to do this? I was like, oh my gosh, yes, World Central Kitchen is waning. I would love to jump into that because by the time August hits, I'll be ready to roll and do this early voting initiative. Great, perfect. Everything's going to go great. And then World Central Kitchen called and said, hey, we just got a CARES Act grant to keep going in Tennessee. So let's keep going in Tennessee.
Oh,
and I can't say no to that.
Talk about like a sitcom plot where you have like 2 dates at the same restaurant.
I know. It literally was like, hold on, hang up, call the other person. So can you hold? Yes. Okay, you hold. I'm like clicking over, call waiting. But I couldn't say no. The World Central Kitchen thing is like one of the most fulfilling jobs I've ever had in my entire life, if not the most. And I also am not going to pass up an opportunity to work in a congressional office and get all the experience of doing that, but B, do something that I believe very strongly in, which is empower people to use their voice in elections, to have them care, to have them understand why their vote matters, and to make it easier for them and frankly fun and celebratory. It's so much more fun if you're voting alongside the place that cuts your hair than it is if it's like an obligation, like
right. And you have to find, you're
day.
Like, I didn't even know there was like a VFW hall there or,
exactly.
Whatever, like just the weird sort of like, oh, okay.
Trying to make it into this celebratory, we had college students stay and we got the marching band from TSU, which is one of our historically Black colleges and universities here in Nashville to be out there and play in front of the church where the early voting was happening. And it was so much fun. And all of that was going great. So now I'm balancing, now I'm feeding people, and I'm helping run this early voting initiative with 2 other amazing women who are total badasses and much younger than me. And I can't wait for them to change the world because they got a big head start on my political awareness, which didn't really kick in until I was radicalized by Rudy Giuliani, but that's a whole other story. So here I am working along, and then Chef José comes up with this brilliant idea to do Chefs for the Polls, which is looking around, realizing that in polling places, there are these long lines, which everybody seems to feel like is a sign that oh my God, look, so many people are voting, but that's voter suppression, guys. If you're waiting in line for 5 hours to vote, something is very wrong. It's not positive. So how can we make sure to get meals to people who are taking off work, missing their lunch hours, sitting out in some places in the cold or the rain or whatever. So we started mobilizing for Chefs for the Polls during early voting here in Nashville as well. So now not only am I running the normal food program where we're feeding 3,000 to 5,000 people a week here in Nashville, but I'm also doing the Chefs for the Polls and mobilizing food trucks to go out to early voting locations while also continuing to do the early voting thing. And it all just kind of culminated on Election Day. I mean, I've just now been rambling for a while, and I hope that you edit a lot of this out. But it all kind of culminated on Election Day when I had food trucks or restaurants or catering companies at 16 polling places in Nashville handing out food.
Oh my gosh.
And was thrilled / horrified to discover that we had no lines at polling places on election day.
Because you did too good a job at your other job, Whitney. Oh my God, that's amazing.
I was like, congratulations, you played yourself to myself. So Wednesday I sat and Wednesday I did a lot of like catch up, close up things, work. And then yesterday I kind of sat and stared at the wall. And today I looked at my inbox and was like, oh, there's whole people who I've completely ignored for a week and a half and I should write them back. And that's where I'm at. That's why maybe I haven't eaten quite as much as I should, which is ironic when you're doing hunger relief work and you're not eating, but it's fine. It's why my dog is just staring at me like, are we ever going to go do anything ever? And why I'm completely exhausted, but it's a great exhaustion. It's the kind of exhaustion that everybody should be blessed to experience in their lives, where they know that, they've gotten a chance to do some stuff that made some real change. And I wouldn't trade it for the world, but I am really looking forward to this weekend.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that is like incredible. I mean, it feels like I don't even know. I can't imagine how it feels, but just the idea of.
Sorry, there goes
exactly.
Wally. Sorry,
Wally. He's Shush. Like he was like, it's not just a joke on the podcast. I really do.
I really am annoyed at you because there's a squirrel outside and you're not allowing me to go deal with that. You got to be quiet, bud. We're on a podcast. Oh, thank you. Okay, sorry. What were you saying?
Oh, no worries. I mean, I'm not going to tell you anything that you don't already know, but just the idea that you have this entire effort of early voting, getting people to get out there, making it easier for them, making it fun, just making them aware that that's even like a thing or an option that they have, that they can, become aware of and utilize in the future is so cool. And then the fact that it then ultimately in some ways like cannibalized your other amazing nonprofit thing that you're involved in to try to like get these food trucks out there for people like on the day is so cool. I mean, and then even then we should say it's like you're still doing that. It's like that is still having an amazing impact because those are all people that are out there then like doing their job and getting paid that might not otherwise be working.
Yeah,
and it's,
for sure. It's just, and it was great. We had some food trucks who are very new at this and, so getting their feet wet in this environment was a blast. And I mean, yeah, all in all, it was crazy. I really drove around most of Tuesday just kicking myself and cheering at the same time. Early voting is funky, though, here in Tennessee. And I'll tell you, it's not something I was familiar with. So I lived in LA before this and New York before that. And we didn't really have early voting in either place at the times when I was there, at least not that I was aware of. I know New York didn't have it. LA might have, but I was not clued in. And, people here in Tennessee, they actually take it very seriously and they're very excited about it and proud of it. And it's probably because it is the one thing that we've got. This is a Republican supermajority, and they're not known for making it easier for people to vote. So early voting is a great thing that Tennessee has, and I think everybody should have it. These places where early voting doesn't open till like 5 days before the election, I think are nuts. Like, let's get out there, let's get voting. Is it Virginia that does it for like a month? Like, let's just vote as soon as you possibly can, right? And I mean, even here, not to bring it down, here in Nashville, we learned the hard way on Super Tuesday that, if you don't vote early, a tornado could come through. And we had a couple of polling places that couldn't open that morning because of the tornado that came through here. So I am now on board completely for the concept of the minute you're able to cast your vote, you need to get out there and be ready to do it and take everybody with you.
Oh yeah, just the idea that like that it used to be, and I mean still I think to some degree is, and obviously there's other underlying dynamics like, you know, racialized voter suppression and different things in play. But even just the sort of like folksy anecdotal political stuff that you hear about where it's like, well, and then it rains, so Republicans are excited because Democrats don't vote in the rain because they don't really care. And
Sure.
so, you know what I mean? Where it's just like the idea
absolutely.
that is just that politics has been living on that knife's edge for so long of just like, well, but if the weather's not nice on this one day, then that could completely change like the outcome of how government reacts to the people that it serves is insane.
Not to mention the partisan divide that has come up just on the existence of voting, right? Where we've seen it on Twitter in the last week or so, where they talk about like the Supreme Court has decided not to let Republicans in Pennsylvania set absentee ballots on fire. That's a win for Democrats. Like, it's not a win for Democrats. It's a win for voting. Like, voting is a founding principle of frickin' America. And it boggles my mind that it is now considered this partisan thing to say, I want every single person who is legally able to vote, and then I want their votes to be counted. I mean, coming out of country music, I don't mind saying how annoying it is to have gone around and tried to convince, you know, my former colleagues in the country music industry that they should be a part of Vote or LATN, and either receiving radio silence or, you know, the sort of like, oh, that's awfully partisan. Like, guys, voting's not partisan. And if somebody gets mad at you, they've got the problem. It's not you. Like, voting is the most basic foundation of the country. So that stuff makes me nuts. It gets under my skin. Because again, I wasn't always this way, but I jokingly said I was radicalized by Rudy Giuliani. I mean, I lived in New York City from 1993 to 2008. So you can imagine living through his regime, sort of how that took me out of just like, I'm in college, everything's fine, to like, I'm going to go march in the streets right now against this lunatic.
So talk about that. I did write down as soon as you said, now I just have a thing in my notebook that says radicalized by Giuliani?
It's true. Well, you know, he's a terrible mayor. And I'm sure those of you who see him nowadays are wondering, like, how did that happen? Because he was crazy as a bat. And he's a human bat. He's a bat. He was more acceptably crazy, I suppose, at the time. But, you know, you're talking about New York City as it's crawling its way out of sort of, you know, all of the damage that was done by the recessions of the 80s and the way they allowed the city to sort of fall into disrepair, and the sort of legendary New York City, you know, crime and rot and danger and all that good stuff, all of which still existed when I moved there in 1993. And then Giuliani comes in as this guy who's like, I'm going to clean up the place. And there was enough of an appetite for that kind of mayor at the time amongst the people who had control. And so he was elected, but it wasn't just, hey, let's make this a better place to live. It was incredibly racist policing policies, and then just dumb stuff like the cabaret law where you can't dance in bars, you know, like what the hell is going on? But it was that entire era of leading up to September 11th, basically, of, Springsteen, Amadou Diallo, 41 Shots, like a real focus among those people who were paying attention about the oppression of racist policing that goes on to this day. You see in the NYPD, it all just sort of, I don't know that it began in that era, but it became sort of codified, and everybody applauded broken windows policing until we figured out that just is an excuse to arrest more Black people. So that was sort of what got me more aware that as a 18, 19, 20-year-old, like, oh, the people in charge don't have our best interest at heart. But it wasn't really until I moved to Tennessee where, for the first time in my entire life at age 40, I am living in a red state and I'm in the minority. And I'd come from my happy world of LA politics, which what do you even do there? You know, I was by no means involved. I had no idea what was happening. It was sunny, life was good. And I moved here and I was like, oh shit, I got to get off my ass. Like, I'm moving to a place where I actually can have an impact. I'm not surrounded by like-minded people necessarily. And one person can make a dramatic change here if they just try. And so I really hit the ground with both feet running and kind of haven't looked back, and it's been amazing. And I'm not encouraging everybody to just pick up your life and move to a red state and find a blue dot in the middle of it and get to work, but it's not the worst way to spend your 40s so far. I'm happy to say.
Right. I mean, yeah, so there's like so much to unpack, but I do think like when you look at, I don't know, it's like, again, this is going to seem, I guarantee like no matter what I say next will seem incredibly dated, probably even 2 hours from now. But like right now where we're at in the sort of like online social media discourse of, you know, Georgia hasn't been called yet, but like if unless some incredible, you know, Bill Barr / the Supreme Court backflip that I totally believe could happen. I'm not trying to take that away from anybody. It's like Biden
yes, don't take that away
leading.
from
like,
Bill Barr, whatever you do.
Please, I would never.
Don't rob him of his joy.
I would never dream of doing that. But Biden is looking like he's going to win Georgia. He's ahead there right now.
Yeah.
And it's built on so many people, you know, getting involved, obviously like Stacey Abrams after losing the governor's race, but also just like so many people on the ground there that have been pushing and like Arizona, where I'm from, again, similar situations, so many different groups and people on the ground and different, you know, different coalitions of people and shifting demographics and all these different things like coming together to, you know, I think for a long time, I guess at least I had, and I think a lot of people who similarly always thought of themselves as being like knowledgeable about politics and having the right politics, but not actually really understanding fully like how stuff works or how stuff doesn't work, kind of just imagine like, well, all we have to do is just sit back until all of the oldest, meanest, most racist white people die. And then naturally the demographics of the country will shift in such a way that eventually everybody will bring their own reusable bags to the grocery store and vote like I do. And it'll just be fine. We just have to like wait for it. But rather I think like what we're seeing is more what you're describing, where it's like, there are these places, these like cool cities in America that aren't just New York and LA, that are full of like, you know, vibrant artistic communities. And again, different coalitions, different groups of people who want to see change and aren't just going to go like, well, I mean, of course that place went red. It's X place. What do you expect? And it's like, well, no, but you understand that those votes are people, right? And that they're like, I don't know. I'm not telling you anything
but
you don't know. I know you're living and breathing this stuff every day.
But I think the best way for people to think about, and this is the analogy that I use sometimes, I'm taking a swing at the demographics of your listeners that they might identify with this metaphor. So the reason I was in New York is I went to theater school. I went to NYU for theater school. And I made the decision after graduating from NYU with a really useful theater degree to stay in New York and keep trying to do theater. And I stayed there for a really long time and kept trying to do theater and got nowhere, to the degree that I changed careers entirely and moved on with my life, stayed in New York, but just switched over to journalism, a highly lucrative field, unlike theater. So, you know, there I am toiling away, banging my head against the wall in New York, trying to get ahead. And I had friends who picked up and moved to, you know, Maine or Colorado or home to Atlanta and started theater companies, and they took off and their work won awards and they got better jobs at better theater companies and started running regional theater. You know what I mean? Like the people who left where everybody in the pool is swimming in the exact same water all the time went out there and they kind of thrived because there's a bit of a vacuum and they were able to find their way. Plus the cost of living is a lot cheaper. And I feel like it's kind of the same when you're thinking about politically aware people in the US, where you have the coastal elites. I get to say that because I live in Nashville. You've got the coastal elites who are, it's like neutrons in a bag just slamming against each other, you know? And the minute you get out into one of these places like Nashville, like Austin. I've got another friend who moved from LA to Austin, and she and I were texting each other on, Wednesday night being like, what are we both doing in politics? It's because you get out here and there's all this air and this space and this need, and suddenly you can be useful. Like it's no longer your one voice in a chorus of millions. You might be a voice in a chorus of thousands, or you might be the only person who looks at something and says, why is that way? And then fixes it. I really identified, you mentioned Arizona, I identified with a Twitter thread that I saw somebody write about their cousin or something becoming the precinct captain for where she lived in Maricopa County in Arizona, and how her choice to do that led directly to them getting a new county election commissioner, which led directly to the experience we've had right now with the way that the votes have been handled and counted properly in that county, right?
Oh,
so same kind of thing, right? I got my very first sample ballot in the mail, and it said Davidson County Democratic Party Executive Committee district representatives, and in every single slot it said no candidate qualified, no candidate qualified, no candidate qualified. And I turned to the next page and it said Republican Party whatevers, and their names galore, right? And I called the one person I had met who was vaguely involved in politics and was like, what's this? And she's like, oh, hold on, let me email somebody. And the next thing I know, they were like, congrats, you've been appointed to the Davidson County Democratic Party Executive Committee. I was like, I don't know what the job is. But clearly there's that desperation for people who are even slightly interested in getting engaged, which is not to discredit all the people who have been here and doing that work, but it's bringing in that vitality, that new blood, the people who are willing to get here and get their hands dirty and get to work and say, how can I help? That's so important. And you never know when you're going to stumble into, like the woman in Arizona, stumble into something that can profoundly change the fabric of American history.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's the whole, I don't know, there's so many, obviously hoping, that Biden, pulls
it's
it
gonna
out.
hold.
Actually,
listen, hang out with me.
No,
we're on a positive
you don't
plane
understand.
Today. It's gonna hold.
Whitney, you don't understand how I didn't go to literally Catholic school, but I have enough of being raised Catholic in me that I can't say that anything good will happen before it's actually completely, in the bag, because then it'll get squashed by the giant, Monty Python foot of a vengeful God. I'm not sure.
I understand. Okay. That's
so with that said,
yes.
But so many incredible things will have come out of this election, and people that we don't even know, people that didn't even win their local races, but had a good showing and made people realize or think it's even possible, or
right.
incumbents that are totally asleep at the switch.
Or just taught people about organizing, right? Taught people how to go. I guess there wasn't a lot of canvassing, not a lot of door knocking that happened in this election, but taught people how to phone bank, taught people how to text bank or use Hustle. The people picked up skills for sure, win or lose.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just think that I'm not the bajillionth person to, or I am the bajillionth person to say, or stuff like this, but it does I'm such a cornball that it does just get me really amped to think about so many of the things that happened in this election were echoes of things and efforts, both good and bad, depending on what you believe, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 200 years ago, that their efforts are just came to fruition this week. And so if you are somebody out there, and again, this is easy for me to say because I probably won't do it myself. I'm easily distractible. I'll just retweet something about you and send you $25 in 2 or 5 years. But if you are somebody who wants to do something big in this world of politics, or just be a part of something big, or points at or lives in a place and goes why can't this place be, why can't this place live up to its ideals, even in super blue, technically LA, where people just this year are realizing wait a minute, our government doesn't actually reflect how fucking to the left all of our beliefs are. Our local people are just coasting on being nominally Democrats.
Absolutely.
That fucking rules. And so if you're somebody that feels that way, no matter where you are, there's probably somebody else that feels that way. And if you start, you kind of have to oh man, there was such a great somebody had such a great metaphor, and I think is this dude Daryl Ayo, and I genuinely think he's a comics guy. I think he was talking about stuff in comics and how comics are perceived, but it was like he was basically just like it was something to do with like the tall trees of tomorrow, you have to like plant seeds today or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's just like, or he was said like, if we had planted seeds back then, they would be tall trees by now. And so you just think like, you can't do anything about the seeds you didn't plant, but you can plant new seeds today.
That is correct. That is what I've been screaming at people here in Tennessee all week. I've annoyed so many of my friends. Like,
what does that look like? I mean,
we need to stop sitting around going, why aren't we Georgia yet? And say, how do we get to be Georgia in 10 years? Right. So being down on ourselves, being mad at ourselves, being upset, being depressed by the results here. I guess I've never been an optimist. Like, I am one of the crabbiest people on the face of the earth. I mean, I grew up with a love for Garfield cartoons in the 80s. I guess I blame it on that. But I now see it so clearly that you've got to take the incremental wins and you've got to build on them, right? And you've got to take the skills that you've learned and you've got to say, okay, what's next? And I even used the LA city council race as an example, as I was screaming at people about the progressive steps and the progressive hurdles that are being cleared across the country. It may seem like a small thing, but I know from my friends who live out there how hard the work was to get her elected. I'm not going to pronounce her name right, so I'm not even going to try. But Nithya, is that correct?
Nithya, yeah, Nithya Raman.
Yeah. So, the work that went into that, it was hundreds and thousands of people truly organizing, not just saying, I'll post about this on my Facebook, but truly organizing to get it done. And that's what it takes. But now you've got that army of people out there who understand what it takes and can do it again. It's replicable, it's scalable. Same thing here in Nashville. We finally flipped a seat in our state house. We only flipped one, again, in our Republican supermajority, and we lost one, so it won't make a big difference in the long run. But we flipped our last remaining state house Republican in the Nashville sort of metro area, and people have been trying to get this guy the entire time I've lived here. I've personally canvassed on at least 2 separate campaigns trying to get that seat, and it hasn't worked. And then this year, we came up with a candidate in Heidi Campbell who had the right mix of people around her. It was a combo of her hard work, the knowledge of the people on her team from previous races, and the new blood that's moved into Nashville. Honestly, we can't discount the new bodies, the 30,000 some odd new voter registrations in that district, many of whom swung for her. But when I look at that campaign, and I was not involved because I was doing the other things, rewind if you want to be reminded what those were. But her campaign manager was my friend Frank. And my friend Frank actually went to theater school with me at NYU. And we both ended up here in Nashville. He's from here originally, so it's not as weird that he's here. But we had a conversation, 3-4 years ago when we ran into each other where he was like, I want to get involved in politics. And he did. And he was a treasurer on a campaign. And he got super involved in organizing and learned how to work on a campaign and learned from a lot of great people who had come before him. And then when he got the opportunity to run Heidi's campaign, he did it, and the bitch fucking won. And I'm referring to Frank when I say that. He pulled it off, and I could not be prouder of him and everybody whose hard work went into that race. Because it is, to me, again, someone who wasn't intimately involved in that campaign, but just watching my friends work from the outside, it felt like sort of like the Avengers had properly assembled and we were finally able to get it done,
That rules, man. I mean, I'm sure you're all too familiar with, I know you are all too familiar with this aphorism from your life in the theater and then in entertainment journalism and whatever. Indeed. But it really is true. It's got to be truer nowhere else more so than in politics, but that it like takes fucking years to make an overnight success. You know?
Absolutely. It does.
So it's like,
and so now I need everyone who's involved in that overnight success and all the other small overnight successes around the country to say, what's our next overnight success that we'll work on for 4 years?
Yeah. I mean, that's what I think. I don't know. I hate to say, it's like, feels weird to admit. because a lot of it is schlocky and people are like, oh, pundits are bad and whatever and blah, 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 blah. But I like love like reading about politics. I love reading about like the history of stuff. I love like Rick Perlstein's books that are all about like Goldwater and Nixon and like basically the rise of American conservatism, not because I am rooting for the people in the books. In fact, I'm very much rooting against them, but because you see, if you strip away the ideology, the tactics and the commitment and the organizing and the sort of like people the second after they experiencing a demoralizing victory, all getting in a room and being like, okay, this is not about right now. This is about how do we turn this around in 5 years? How do we get the right people around us? How do we look for the right people? How do we maximize our opportunities? Because we really think there's something here. We know there's more people out there that agree with us. We just need that shot. And if we're not ready for it when it comes, we won't get it. So we got to like get ready. That shit is like so inspiring. It's so, you know what I mean? Like,
for sure.
It's
what everybody out there needs to hear about that and this and the work that's to be done. Like, let's say you just phone banked for the first time and you just spent the last 2 weeks making calls to Texas and you feel like it didn't amount to anything. Well, it did, right? Because you probably activated a handful at least of people who, you know, didn't think it was worth their time and now they know that it is. But more importantly, you now know that is a sliver of the work that goes into a campaign. Like by the time you get to phone banking, you've already missed the isolating a race, isolating a candidate, isolating why that candidate is right against the incumbent, fundraising, kill me, fundraising, you know, community engagement. I mean, one of the conversations I'm having with so many people right now is this notion that we wait until the election is effectively right around the corner to start reaching out to voters. And that's when you're there. That's when you're phone banking. Hey, did you know there's an election on November 3rd? Well, duh. Everybody freaking knows that. That's not the question we should be asking. We should be calling people next week and saying, okay, here's the seats that are potentially up for re-election or for a challenger in 2 years. Who would you like to see run? Who would you like to see taken on? What would you like to see change? Because if you wait till it's all decided and all the puzzle pieces are in place and try to jam them in, you know, you've left. This analogy is falling apart. You've left a lot of puzzle pieces on the floor. But like literally, we need to start now. We need, like in Tennessee, we needed to start Wednesday figuring out who is going to challenge Marsha Blackburn for her Senate seat when it comes up in 4 years, right? That process can't start in 2 years. It can't start, you know, the year of the, whatever. We need to start that conversation now because that person not only has to start fundraising, again, insert eye roll and vomit noise, but we've got to get people into the communities to find out, what do you want? What are you looking for? What's Marsha not doing? Which is everything, but setting that aside, you know, who would you like to see run? Can you think of anybody who would be great? And start reaching out to our neighbors and having these conversations, even in what will be considered an off year or an off cycle. Because otherwise it's too late when you get to that point where everybody is suddenly putting vote in their Instagram. You know?
And what you want to see, a million %. I mean, what you want to see is like, I don't know, you know, what you're hoping for is that the person that doesn't realize until it's way too late for them to do anything about it, to organize and fight, is the incumbent, you know, like is the person who's thinks that they're invincible because, well, I live in this place and therefore I can always just kind of say the same thing and vote X way and it'll always be fine. The idea of that, just the sort of like the visceral, just like, if it's somebody that you disagree with and is just like lazy and out of touch, the idea of them realizing with 2 weeks left to go, like, oh shit, I got a problem here. I better tell people.
I mean, it's the AOC story, right?
I know.
Everybody needs to watch Knock Down the House if they haven't. I mean, you could obviously read her story, but that's a way more compelling way to do it. And it's still on Netflix. Go watch Knock Down the House and look at how complacent Joe Crowley was with like a month to go. He didn't even show up for a debate. And she did the work. She knocked the doors. She went to the community meetings. She met everybody. And that's the real transactional politics that I think sometimes our generation and the one below mine, so I'm 45, right? So me and everybody younger than me, sometimes we do lose sight of it simply because we are so accustomed to being able to put 150 friends on an email, click a button and assume they all read it, or post it on our Instagram or tweet it, God forbid. But there's no comparison to going to community meetings and neighborhood meetings and meeting people and sitting and listening. Like every campaign, big or small, should be run with the same level of attention to neighborhood that a Metro Council campaign is. You know, you as the candidate or your candidate might not be able to physically be in all those locations at once, but that's what surrogates are for. That's what campaign volunteers are for. But that work has to start now. It can't start the year of the election. If your friend Bob, let's not even say Bob, no more Bobs running for seats. If your friend Laura wants to run for a seat right now, okay, your friend Laura, if she's looking at a seat, you know, a congressional seat 2 years down the road, she needs to look at the calendar, find the next possible neighborhood meeting, which will probably be on Zoom, and go to it. Or start showing up in her local park with materials and handing them out to people who are walking by. Whatever it is, start having those conversations right now so that in a year, when somebody says, hey, who's this Laura? There will be enough people who will know who Laura is because they'll have heard about her. And then with 6 months to go, you know, you'll have converted those people into volunteers and you can really put the pedal to the metal.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, it's also just like everything that you're describing is just like when you think about it, is just like the most like decent human thing you could possibly do, is just like getting to know the people who live around you and being like, what do you care about? How can I make your life better? Is just like, if you think about that and you take that deadly in earnest, which I genuinely think a lot of people who are actually running, like they actually do, I think, especially at the beginning, like, that's so wonderful. Like, what could be better than that? You know, it's just so, I don't know.
That's why I get so frustrated when people are like, I hate politics. You don't hate politics. Yes.
Right.
You hate what it's turned into. Politics at its core is exactly those two questions you just asked. You know, it's who are you? How are you? And how can we make your life better? Like what, that's it. That's the whole point. And then you convert that into policy. But in order to get those people in the places to make them into policy, you've got to deal with the political part first. But it shouldn't have to be a dirty business, and it shouldn't have. I mean, God, how I wish we could have the same system that the Brits do, right? Where they can only like campaign for 6 weeks or something. And there's like, no, you can't put money into it and stuff. I might be getting this wrong, but I'm
I think you're right. I think it's like the election gets like called, meaning like they're like, I guess we should have one, or you know, whatever they do. That part always
right. They wave a wand, and Dumbledore says it's time to have an election. I don't know.
And then they only get like a limited amount of time, and then all you're voting for is just like either this local person or this local person, and then based on that, that's what's going to determine like those people are committed to like, well, I would vote for this person for PM, and the other person's like, I would vote for this other person, and then they do, and then and
then it's over.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing, is that the politics part shouldn't last for 4 years between presidents, or 6 years between senators, or even 2 years between congressmen, because that's how you end up with these elected officials on the federal level, and even to some degree on the state level, needing to spend all their time fundraising, especially in those congressional 2-year terms. That the politics part shouldn't last that long, and the money shouldn't be involved, but that's a much longer conversation. But the community part should never stop. If you're only hearing from your elected official, again, whether it's your council person or your state senator or your U.S. House representative, they're only popping up when about a year out from when their term expires, you got a problem. And find somebody who actually wants to do the work and wants to be involved in your community, because that's what they're paid to do. They're paid to represent you and your next door neighbor and their next door neighbor. So I don't know. I just wish it could be like a citizenship award, like we got in first grade. Like, you seem to care the most. Do you want this job? You get it.
Absolutely.
You have everybody's best.
Right. Do you want to? You're going to take the class turtle home.
You
over
can
the
carry the flag now. Yeah, yes. Exactly. Good job, you.
Well, that brings up
instead
a
of it
very
coming
painful
down
memory
to,
for
like,
me, because
oh
my
no.
election to elementary school fifth grade class student council president resulted in a tie in which I had to share the office of class
Oh,
president with, or school or elementary, it was something, student council president with Lauren Plen. And I think it was maybe just that they like lost the votes or didn't feel like counting them. So they were like, fuck it, you're both president, whatever.
that's
And
crushing.
then that was a really tough term. We had to do one thing, which I think was like stand by a flag for something that I don't even remember what it was. And there was like, they took our picture for the newspaper. And then I think that was it.
That's
Um,
not bad though. It's not a bad gig.
no, it was great, but I wasn't super in touch with my constituents. I think is what
That's
I'm trying to
fine.
say.
No, I had a checkered. In first grade I was something. I remember I got to carry the flag a lot, and I'm frightened to admit I did grow up in Houston, Texas, but that's still no excuse that it had something to do with the Daughters of the American Revolution. Which again, first grade, I don't know what that is. I'm off the hook. It was just a civics organization, I guess, at the time. But then in junior high, I did run to be student body treasurer, and I lost to Connolly Gibbs. I think it was my platform, which is the Women Are Superior platform. Which, in retrospect, given that my opponent was also a woman, it's confusing to me why I wrote that on large pieces of poster board and stuck them all over. Um, Maybe it was high school. I don't know. Anyway, it didn't go well. I didn't win. A lot of people told me that they were going to vote for me, and then they heard my speech about women being superior and changed their mind. So I've not changed. Extremely
I mean,
similar.
I think you were just trying to, I think, project an air, and I think it's wise of being bigger than politics. You're saying she's a woman, I'm a woman,
Well, I
I'm
think I knew even then that we needed to let the men shuffle it off and go do something else for a little while. And I
again.
think if we assume this was in 1990 when this happened, I think I was right.
You weren't wrong. You were just ahead of your
Prescient.
time.
I was
You were
ahead of
just
my time. That's
first
correct.
through the door. I also ran for something in middle school, and the really appealing part about it was that they were going to do speeches on the like intra-class like TV system. So you would like go to the office and they would like tape you, and it would be like broadcast throughout the school. I think it was even
Okay.
live. I don't know how they do it. It seems like way more ambitious than it should have been at the time. But so everybody was going to like sit and hear these speeches about like who was going to, who's running for like sixth grade class, whatever. And my whole, again, talk about being responsive to your constituents. My whole platform was that there was going to be a box, like a shoe box or whatever, we had these things called pods, where it was like the pod of classrooms or whatever. And those kids were in most of your classes with you.
Okay. Sure. Yeah.
And my thing was like, there's going to be a box in the pod. And if you have like complaints or thoughts or whatever, just on like what the school should be or
Mm-hmm.
isn't doing, none of which is actually in my power as a whatever. But anyway, to fix, put it in the box, and then we'll read them, and then we'll like, do stuff about it and
That's really responsive
do what we can.
leadership.
And
Yeah.
thank you. And I even had a visual aid to illustrate the point, which I think is really important and hooky. And so I like did my whole speech, and I was like, I literally like pulled out the box and was like, had some line of things like, now you're probably wondering what this is. And then apparently I'm told I thought my speech went great. And then I got back to the classroom and everybody was like, what was with the box? And I was like, what do you mean? And they
Oh
were like, yeah, you
no.
pulled out the box. You were like, you're probably wondering what this is. And then the feed like cut out,
Oh
and then it like
no.
cut back in, and you were like, thank you.
See, and whereas I predicted the fall of the patriarchy, you predicted the movie Seven.
That's right. Yes, exactly. I ran on the beheading Gwyneth Paltrow platform, and it was a total non sequitur at that time because she had I think she was maybe in Great Expectations.
Yeah, I
I
was
don't
gonna
know.
say it made no sense. I still maintain that. I still maintain that the ending of that movie was not as horrific as it could have been, and I'll carry it to my grave that it should have been the baby in the box. It shouldn't have
Ooh,
been her
yeah. I
head.
mean, you got to wonder if there isn't like, if that wasn't just something that they ADR'd after the fact. Maybe that was like
I don't know, but that's so much more gutting. If you're really being cruel, you ruin both their lives. You don't just ruin his. I don't remember a
it.
whole lot else about the plot of that movie, but it was like Kevin Spacey was real mad. Is that right?
Yeah, because it was like that 90s thing where it's sort of a like generalized, like the world is so terrible and everything is like
Right.
drenched in like sin.
Right.
And then you think about it now and you're like, it was the 90s. Chill, everyone.
But that was our whole thing in the 90s. I was trying to
know.
explain this to the interns on one of our congressional staff calls the other day, I guess Wednesday, as I was screaming at everybody to chin up. Like, it's going to have to be the kids who are growing up now in this time where it is really hard, but there's less of a like embrace of darkness as there was when, you know, I was in high school and was listening to a lot of quote unquote grunge and watching David Fincher movies. Like, anything sincere in my teenage, even college years, was just laughed out of the room because we were so enamored with our, you know, slacker reality bites, whatever the heck it was. I have no idea how they did it to us in Gen X, but they really broke us early on. And you know, the people who are in college or in their 20s now are gonna have to hold on to the sincerity that allowed them to give a shit about who won American Idol and take that with them into the world, because we need that. We don't need my generation of people being like, oh, of course it sucked because we always knew it would. You know, that doesn't get you anywhere. Like,
yeah, the idea just even of like memes or like viral dances, that it would be a thing where it's like, and then you saw somebody do it, so now you're doing it.
Yeah.
I think would have been so anathema. Like when I was in high school, just the idea of like, I just had such a reflexive sort of like, aren't we supposed to be like reflexively nonconformist in a way that doesn't really mean anything,
and
but
so
just means
pointing out, like, being ironic about shit that like that it's they really did do a number. I mean, I was honestly thinking earlier in this year about like there's been a conspicuous lack of protest music, I think, in the Trump era for whatever reason. Either it's because it's just too much, or because the, you know, music world is so fragmented now that we don't have the monoculture anymore where you're aware of everything. But even thinking about, you know, maybe with the exception of you know, some of the stuff that Bruce Springsteen's been saying lately on his Sirius XM channel, whatever, I even think about like Pearl Jam has been relatively quiet when they were still allowed to have concerts versus what they were doing during the George W. Bush era, right? And the Iraq War. Like, just has been strangely muted using music as a protest. But then I think about like, well, when in my era, not talking about the 60s, but like when was protest music and music with a social issue behind it really big? And it was the 90s. So let's go back to the 90s. Like, what did that accomplish? Like literally nothing, because we laughed everyone out of the room. Like, Lilith Fair, ha ha ha, you guys are just grating feminists, you know? Like, Rage Against the Machine, what's that even about? Well, they were right about everything in 1992, but sure. Like,
and then they wound up being Paul Ryan's favorite band.
I know. And then, oh my God, did you know that Tom Morello is like kind of an anarchist? I don't know. Anyway, people are shocked to discover that. But all these causes, we were so, it's that, what is that Faith No More song, We Care a Lot, where they're just listing off causes, and then like it's just shit that people just shat on in the 90s. Like, nobody cares. I was thinking the only thing that we accomplished really to any vast degree is, I think we sort of like were the bridge that the LGBTQ rights movement sort of had to cross to get to, you know, the legalization of gay marriage. And that's the one thing we didn't squash with our dismissal of all things sincere. Like, we actually were like, yeah, no, that's cool. Right on. Okay. And that one made it through, but like environmentalism, snore. Sure, I'll cut up my soda rings so the seagulls don't choke to death. Whatever. Even I made some bad joke on Twitter the other day, and I think I hurt somebody's feelings, and I had to apologize. Like, somebody brought out the old, you know, the founder of Domino's supports Operation Rescue. And I can't hear that without hearing Janine Garofalo's voice saying, oh, who gives a shit? We're starving in Reality Bites, because I'm just programmed that way. It's terrible. I don't know how I even got to this particular rant, but if you're out there and you're listening and you're still young and idealistic and have at any point danced on TikTok while pointing to words about the Electoral College, like, don't lose that. We need you.
Yeah, I know. It's so great.
Wally needs you too.
Wally agrees. And
Yeah.
it's so, I don't know. It's just crazy to me and great. And it's like, it's a bummer that everybody only only ends up learning how everything works when it's in the process of being like, it's because they're breaking it.
Exactly.
People are trying to take it apart. Here's why it is the way it is and why that kind of works actually.
True.
Or here's the part of it that we should take apart and whatever. And this is why we need to learn about it and why it's so fucked up. But it's good that people are actually doing it. It's very heartening in a way. So nominally try to sort of like tick the box of, because I think this will be I can imagine what the answer is going to be, but maybe I'm wrong, but to nominally sort of like tick the box of the show's thematic nature. How does home cooking fit in or not fit into your life at the moment? And that moment, I could imagine, could either mean like literally like right now this week, or the past few months in the pandemic, or in your life more in general for the past few years. However you interpret that, how does it fit in or not fit into your life at the moment?
When I was a little girl, no, I'm just kidding. At the moment, I'm getting back on the horse. Obviously, I had a few weeks back there where I did an extremely bad job. Since the beginning of the pandemic, again, I'm extremely paranoid, and I am an asthma sufferer who does not want to get COVID, violently does not want to get COVID. So I've been really restricting myself to like one major grocery store trip a month. So that's been requiring me to explore the wonderful world of like frozen vegetables and canned foods a little bit more. But I've been doing a pretty good job. There's also a really cool company here in the Nashville area that does grass-fed beef and other, meat that's good for you, and that like all the animals had names before they turned into your meat. And you can go pick that up at like breweries and farmers markets and stuff. So I've been getting orders through them when I need meat, but also just a lot of frozen tofu products. So it actually has been consistent home cooking throughout, which meant a lot of crock potting and putting stuff in the freezer. A lot of just a shit ton of tacos involving either meat that I had already prepared or frozen soy meat, but then trying to make sure that I have things like I had a garden. So I had a lot of fresh tomatoes, a lot of fresh peppers. I'm not a great farmer, but I can make some things grow. More cucumbers than I knew what to do with for a minute there. It got really touch
I was going
and
to say,
go.
from everything I understand from friends of mine that have tomato plants or cucumbers or both, that eventually do sort of like, if you can get them past the stage of like, they're tiny little things that might just totally die. If you let them like take root a little bit, apparently you turn around and like, you just have more tomatoes than you know what you're just like foisting tomatoes on everyone, you know.
It's true.
And speaking as the person that receives those tomatoes, I love it. But
it's a gift. That's me with peppers more often than it is with tomatoes, because I've got some cardinals and squirrels who live in my backyard who are just assholes. So it's a lot of defensive maneuvers go on out there involving netting and all kinds of other things. But so, I've done a really good job, I think, during the pandemic of learning how to shop for a long time and learning how to consistently prepare meals that are definitely healthier than whatever I was eating before in restaurants or whatever. Because I think I'm one of the rare people during the pandemic who's lost weight. I don't know. Like, I think I'm just eating more protein, more vegetables, just because it's easier to keep that stuff around. I would say in general, my cooking style is fairly adventurous. I like to try to make new stuff. I like trying, I like finding a recipe and being like, that's weird. And then I'll just keep it until I get around to it. I made last night for, I think the first time, although it's a recipe I've wanted to try forever, an overnight chicken, which is,
is that where you put it in the stove at a really low, or an oven at a really low temperature?
I cooked it for like 8 hours. I didn't cook it overnight, but I air dried it. I salted it and put it in the fridge and air dried it overnight and then stuck it in. And so it was just cooking all day. So when I got home yesterday at like 6, I just pulled it out and I had a chicken that was literally falling off the bone. My dog was very mad at me. Plus I had, probably 8 cups of broth that I'll be able to use later in the soup or to make something else taste better. So I like doing that kind of stuff, like project-y cooking, but I would not say that was always historically true. I'll tell you what got me truly, what radicalized me in the cooking space was when I moved to LA and I joined one of those CSAs.
Sure.
And then suddenly I had, 2 pounds of turnips every week and I had to learn what a turnip was. Because I was coming from New York City, the land of Chinese food can be at your house in 4 minutes. So why bother?
And your kitchen is as small as the turnip that you just got from your CSA box in California.
Absolutely. So it was, that was great to sort of just teach me that not only do I like cooking, but I'm pretty good at it and I can make really good stuff. I'm a very good cook, if I do say so myself. It just sucks that now I can't really cook for anybody. That's the part that sucks. Wally, unfortunately, does not have a sophisticated palate.
Oh man, but you are driving him absolutely insane with that chicken smell. That's just permeating the house all day while you're gone.
He was not happy about it at all, and then just literally yipped at me when it looked as though I was going to eat it all or put it all away and not give him any.
Did he get some? I think the people need.
He did. He
did. Thank God.
Yeah, for sure. He's fine. He'd like you to think he's oppressed, but he's really not.
Has it been, though, I mean, you're saying like to not have anybody to cook for, but by the same token, you're like also doing this giant thing early in the pandemic. And then in the election season where it's like you're cooking for, or, like facilitating the feeding of like tons and tons of people. What can you talk a little bit about like what that was like early on, what that was like during the pandemic? And my most important question about that, which is, have you ever been on a Zoom with José Andrés?
Okay. No, I haven't met him. He retweeted me once and I got like 17 texts from people I know being like, oh my God.
That's
because
awesome.
Everybody loves him, right? He's
the coolest.
Beloved.
Yes, he's like the perfect Venn diagram of sort of like the absolute inverse of like Donald Trump values plus really amazing chef plus like super just like small d democratic, like just very just like for the people. And
he's just kind of a weirdo. Like I think that's what makes it great is that he's not like, there are some people who is just too good and you can't look at him, but like, I mean, again, I've never met the man and he comes across though as like a quirky, eccentric, like wonderfully crazy human being, which makes it even better. And I just love it so much. I love it. It's my favorite kind of energy is like what is on the map, like not chaotic good, but the other one, like, anyway, I'm talking about internet memes that I can't even remember. I
think that's originally a D&D alignment chart, which I've never even officially played D&D, but I think it just has something to do with like what your character's overall moral like skew is, like just sort of.
Well, he's the best category, whatever category.
I agree.
He's in that category. In terms of feeding people, I can't recommend it highly enough. Even if you're not feeding yourself. And truly, for me, my stress reaction is not to eat; it's to not eat. I just go the other way. And there are things like I can't deal with, like in really like traumatic or stressful or overbearing times in my life. My default is always like cheese pizza. But I live in Nashville, which is not really the home of the slice. No offense to my friends who have pizza restaurants. All your pizza is really good. I'm sorry. But it's not like New York City where you just go down to the corner and you get your slice of greasy cheese pizza and you're set for the day. That was all your calories. It's not the same sort of vibe here. But I just don't eat. So if I'm really busy, I'm usually driving around without eating anything until 6 or 7 o'clock at night, which is terrible. Don't do that. But if you have the opportunity to starve yourself to death while feeding other people, I highly recommend it because it's the most incredible feeling to do something so simple and understand the joy that it brings to others. And in cases like now, when we're in a time where there are people experiencing not just your humdrum food insecurity, but true terror about where their next meal is going to come from for a variety of reasons. It's the most fulfilling thing. I think I said this before that I've ever had the chance to do. And it's the moment when you're standing doing a distribution, whether it's at an elementary school or a community center, or, our chefs have the opportunity to go into some of our, public housing authority buildings or work with a senior support group or, immigrant outreach communities. You get the chance to go and just meet people where they are and say, here is food, here's a meal, here's a fully cooked meal. It's not something you have to cook for yourself like it would be maybe if it was a box of dry goods or, canned goods or something. You don't have to do anything. Just here's a complete meal for you. How many people are in your family? Okay, then here's 6 complete meals, restaurant quality, the kind of thing that you would get if you went into a nice restaurant and sat down at a table and somebody brought it to you. Please enjoy. You don't have to prove anything. You don't have to show us any paperwork. You don't have to make an excuse. It's literally just, hi, how many people do you need to feed? Here you go. And I do, again, to keep talking about Twitter, but it's all I don't talk to humans anymore. So like, I did tweet this recently, like it's that moment where their faces turn from apology into like joy and gratitude because you're not having to jump through a hoop. And I don't care what their story is. I just want to make sure they've got a meal, that everybody has a meal, because it's so simple. It's the simplest thing that we should be able to do for each other, period. And so I don't know,
that rules.
It's such a gift, and I'm so grateful. And it's like a happy byproduct that I've gotten paid to do this along the way, I mean, the best kinds of jobs are the ones where you would be doing it for free anyway. And I think both this and the Vote Early TN both fall into that category of like, yeah, absolutely would be doing this even if there wasn't a dime in it for me.
Yeah, just like purely, I think that the thing that is the most sort of, or that I really responded to, I mean, there's so much there, but like just the idea of not having to, because there is this expectation that if we're going to give somebody something, or if somebody is going to accept something in our society that they're not exchanging money for, that it should come like larded with like shame or approbation or hoop jumping, or that it should be, I was thinking a lot about, I was writing for this like streaming sort of like, it was a benefit, streaming like benefit. They were trying to get celebrities to do different stuff. This is like during the pandemic. And
wait, are you a celebrity?
No, I wasn't right. I was writing for it. I wasn't the celebrity.
Oh no, that was even an unnecessary dig. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So, but they were describing like, okay, well, we had written all this stuff, and then they come back and somebody's manager says like, hey, we just really think like he's going to do this between like 1 and 2 p.m. today, and he's running from this to that. So like, it just needs to be like a lower lift. We need some lower lift ideas. And I'd never really heard that term before, but it immediately made sense to me. Like, oh yeah, they just want, it's going to have to film this themselves. They don't want to take a bunch of time to have to do a whole thing, and who knows how good that'll go. So they just want something where this person can just look in their cell phone camera and be like, hey guys, give money, whatever, shout out to this, gotta go, bye. While they're like on the run, which totally makes sense. But I'd never heard that put in that way before, like the idea of like low lift versus high lift. And that did get me thinking with like voting and with like, again, like you were saying, like feeding people, like the idea we have, when you look in what our society makes low lift for people and what it makes high lift for people, the things that they have to put a ton of effort into versus the things that are just easy, tells you everything you need to know about what our values are. And so just 100%. The idea that you're working for some place that is making it a low lift for people, that we're not larding this with shame or hoop jumping or any of that stuff. We're not trying to like send you some moral message about like, you should have had more savings because you should have had a great job that you had no way to get. And you should have somehow prevented this global pandemic from occurring to you.
We put no, you should on it. That you should have. That phrase should just be omitted from relief on any level, whether it's housing or food, or even in talking about education in communities that have been, deeply underserved by their local administration and federal administration as far as education funding. Like, there's no, you should be doing something differently. Like, it sucks. Let's fix it. That should be the bare minimum. What's that book? Is it Evicted? Have you read that? Yes, Evicted. It's by, I just found it on my bookshelf. It's by Matthew Desmond. And if anyone hasn't read it, I think a lot of people have, but it's, he basically embeds himself in the low income communities in Milwaukee and follows families who are trying not to get evicted or survive in the aftermath of being evicted. And as like, a nice white person who grew up pretty middle class, I think it really brought home, for me at least, the truism that it is incredibly expensive to be poor, because everything you do comes with a fine or a fee.
Right.
And the same, I think, that we're saying about food could be said about so many different things when it comes to dealing with people in need. It's like exactly what you said. Just make it a lower lift, give them fewer hoops to jump through, make there not be a fine or a fee involved. Find another place to get your income, metro, whatever, because that's not really what it's coming down to. You're just trying to punish them. And that's not right, because it's really nobody's fault.
Yeah, and I do think that there is just such a, like, when you described the sort of like apologetic look on somebody's face, I think that's one of the things that is so, that's one of those things that it's going to take a lot longer to solve than any one sort of like policy fix, is this like ingrown, and who knows where it comes from. I think it's like a weird weaponization of like the Protestant work ethic combined with like obviously a bunch of institutional racism and like other shit, but that says to to Americans, even Americans that are in need, that like, if you are like, for example, like, you know, having to like panhandle on the street and ask people for money, that you should have to make some show of being like, well, here's my story and here's why, and I actually whatever, and I just need this.
Right. It's a
rather
sign of
than just
moral
being like,
failure.
I'm having a hard time right now, you know, like, and we shouldn't have to have there be some sort of like parsing out of, well, what exactly is this person? Are they whatever? But everybody on every side, it seems, for the most part, feels some sort of like, well, are they really, do they really need it or do they not? Am I getting taken for a ride here?
Yeah,
and then from people that actually are in need, like, I need to prove that, no, I really do need this. And I'm so ashamed to have to ask for help, blah, 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 blah. That I think is like so deep in our DNA, unfortunately, that part is going to take a lot. But I think letting people know that it's possible, just from the standpoint of somebody who's doing things for people, that you can just like do shit for them and not have to freight them with a bunch of bullshit that they have to do to get it, is awesome.
Yeah, I love this trend that we've got, I think, all over the country now with these, like, we used to have little free libraries, and now there's like little free food pantries and little free refrigerators springing up. We've got a couple entirely free stores here in Nashville for food or clothes or whatever, where you just go get what you need, you know, no questions asked, you know, that kind of stuff. It's great, because we definitely, those of us who have enough probably still have too much and can always find a way to give or give back. You know, but the socialist rabbit hole that I'm prepared to go down has to do with corporate welfare, and who are the real cons here. But I'm going to spare your listeners.
Oh, no. I mean,
from that,
1,000,000%. I told you before we even got on the mics that this show always starts with like, what veggie lasagna did you make? And then always ends with
hard.
Like,
veggie lasagna
trying
is
to bring
hard.
down the capitalist.
It's so hard to pull off a veggie lasagna because it's so wet.
And the zucchini is, you see the moisture in the zucchini, that's big oil, and they're motivated to,
I'm standing here in my sweatshirt that I've been wearing all week for luck. I worked my tail off on the Elizabeth Warren campaign, and I will always identify as Team Warren. I'm obviously thrilled that Joe Biden is going to be our next president and that Kamala Harris is going to be our next vice president. But I was Team Liz, and everything that she says about the system being rigged is exactly right. And I think she's exactly the right messenger for that, because everything she's trying to say about how she came from just a normal, straightforward family and figured out that the system was rigged when it was rigged against her, and has been trying to find ways to unrig it her entire life. That rings so true, right? That's the credible messenger, the credible witness that you're looking for. But this idea that rich people are not inherently better than you. Successful corporations are not inherently better than small mom and pop businesses that are struggling. Like, in fact, it's usually the inverse. And I for one, am tired of that capitalist need to bigger, better always, because that's just rarely true in my experience. And I would really like it on so many levels, going back to organizing. If we can just get back in touch with our communities, get back in touch with taking care of one another, get back in touch with doing it small and doing it right, rather than being so incessantly in a hurry to step on everybody as we claw our way towards something.
Well, but Whitney, don't you want people to have freedom? Don't you want them to have the freedom to have to work a million shitty jobs just to be able to maybe and probably not have healthcare because they don't have any of those jobs full time. And don't you love the freedom of that? Isn't it so free though?
When I lived in New York City during September 11th, I can tell you that there was one word that I never tired of hearing, and it was freedom, followed closely by the phrase "now more than ever."
Yeah,
I love both
now
of
more,
those.
now more than ever is still a sentimental
It's
favorite
so
of
great.
mine.
And now, obviously, the 2020 versions of those are in these challenging / unprecedented times. Yeah, no, freedom. And here's the thing, your freedom ends where my freedom begins. And so if your freedom to be a megalomaniacal capitalist asshole who lies and cheats and steals and takes advantage of people is impacting the lives of the people in your community, then that's where your freedom ends. Sorry. Just is. That's America.
I had done a bunch of research on a project that will probably never see the light of day, but did involve sort of like during the New Deal, a bunch of businessmen getting together, and this like really happened, and founded a thing called the American Liberty League. And it was one of the first times that they ever, like, I really think they were all sitting around, and I don't think the version of it that's in my head happened, but I do think, based on the historical records, some version of they were just like spitballing, like, how do we say we don't like all of this, the things where the government takes money from rich people and gives it to poor people to like take care of them because the rich people ruined everything. How do we say that we don't like that without just saying like, no, give it to us, it's ours,
Right,
we want
mine.
it. How do we say that? And then some fucking, like, it was that moment in a movie where somebody in the back of the room was like, you know, it was a sort of thing where somebody was like, hey, we got a free salad with our lunch order or something. And then somebody's like, wait, say that again. And they were like, free. And then they were like, wait, that's it. Freedom. It's freedom. You know, like it wasn't literally that, but they did just like come up with that as a fucking meme, and it stuck. The idea that is so, and it's so sticky. That's what we got to get at. We got to get at these little sticky little things that stick in our heads, and then they become so ingrained. Oy.
Well, and then we've got to hear, you know, organizing in the South, you hear a lot, especially here in Tennessee, you hear about Tennessee values. Mm-hmm. And, you know, that's what we're going to run on, especially if you're a female politician. You need to run on Tennessee values. And that generally means that you hate gay people, that immigrants are fine to do, you know, menial tasks where you pay them off the books. But in terms of like becoming citizens or getting a college education, we're not going to do that. And any, you know, fiscal failing of yours is a moral failing. And if you just gone to the right church or prayed a little bit more, you know, you might be okay. And that is not my Tennessee values or the Tennessee values of anyone else who lives here that I know.
You're in the home of the whole state is built on the Tennessee Valley Authority.
Oh, I see what you did there.
Brought to you by socialism.
Tennessee values. Sure, yeah, and it's
I see. That's the thing too. I was just,
I see what you did there, but also it's the volunteer state. So, you know, come on, y'all, let's go, let's volunteer, let's help. And for whatever reason, we're kind of just stuck in this endless tape loop of electing people who say one thing and then do something different. But we'll fix it. We'll get there. Again, it comes down to education, and honestly, I think in a lot of cases here, and I may be speaking out of turn, and I'm sure someone will send me something sternly worded about this, but I think the fact that people are having to struggle so hard to survive in some parts of this state makes it really difficult for them to focus or, you know, drill down deep enough to look underneath when their politicians are promising them more freedom and figure out that what that means is it's going to be freedom from having a rural hospital or broadband or a school, you know, like that's the freedom.
Yeah. I mean, weaponized
they hear it
in,
they hear it in this jingoistic language, and you know, so long as there's a brown person below you to step on, you'll be fine. And that's what we've got to change, but it's got to start with education. And so it's a chicken and the egg kind of thing in a lot of ways. But yeah, I get really sick and tired of it because even the neighbors who I sometimes am frustrated with and don't like on my street, I'm talking about literal neighbors, like even the ones who bug me are still genuinely good, caring, kind individuals who put candy out on Halloween and you know, if your house was on fire, they'd come help put it out. Like, it's good people who live here. And so co-opting the phrase Tennessee values to make it about something sinister and bullshit just drives me nuts. It drives me nuts from a marketing standpoint.
Oh yeah, but it's okay.
But what doesn't these days?
I know. It's, but you know, it will work until it doesn't work for them. It'll work until it doesn't work.
Well, it'll work until we find somebody who can credibly oppose it with, no, this is the truth, right? But again, that's not going to be, you know, Whitney Pastorek, Houston native, lived in New York City for 15 years and moved here from LA, is not going to be the one to run for office in this state and try to tell people the truth. But it's going to be somebody who's born and raised here and can really speak to that pride. I could probably go home to Texas and run for something. Not that I would ever do that, but you know, it's got to come from somebody who really truly can speak in an authentic way about whatever the subject is. And you know, that's a huge hurdle, I think, too, for a lot of us who have left where we're from or who have left the big cities, is coming in and trying not to seem like, you know, piss over everything in our big cityness, and just be humble and quiet and sit and listen and learn and hear what people need and what they want, and then help find the right person to take care of those needs and support them to do it.
Oh, I mean, it's so, yeah, it's cool. I don't know. It's inspiring. I know that person's going to come along. I just know it. And the fact that you're like laying the groundwork already is so cool. I don't know. It's just really neat. I don't know. That's all I can say. I mean,
well, it's nice. It is neat. I mean, look, our turnout in Tennessee isn't high enough for Marquita Bradshaw, who was running against Bill Hagerty to be our next U.S. senator. Unfortunately, we don't have high enough turnout yet for her to have had a real shot. But she would have been the first Black woman. She was the first Black woman nominated by a major party for Senate here in Tennessee, and then, you know, obviously would have been a huge triumph for the New South, quote unquote. But she's the right person. I believe that people like Marquita are the right people, right? Because her story is, I grew up in Memphis in a neighborhood that was so overlooked to the point that they put a giant garbage dump there, and then everybody started getting cancer. So let's not do that anymore, right? Like, there's nothing simpler than that. Like, this shit has to change, and because I experienced it, I think I can help change it. That's what we want. Those are the people we want. I mean, I think that's just like everybody who has been successful in modern politics, I think, has had some level of that, including, you know, freaking Bill Clinton and all of his Hope, Arkansas stuff. Like, that was what that was all founded on, right? He was just a little boy from Hope growing up. So,
yeah, and it's like, yeah, it's.
But it was true. It was authentic. He
right.
wasn't
No, absolutely. And that was
the one thing he might not have been bullshitting about.
And again, you can't underrate the power of corniness. Like, corniness, this is something else I saw somebody say on Twitter, where they were just like, you know, like, irony gets applause, corniness wins ball games. Right. And I completely feel that way, because I'm also a huge cornball. So I agree. So that goes towards my biases for sure. But I wanted to know, I think either second to last question, or maybe third to last.
We
question.
got
I'm
off food again. I'm so sorry.
No. This was never going to be about, think of what week it is. This was never going to be all about the veggie lasagna.
Do you want to know how many bags of gummy bears I've had to eat this week?
Oh my God. We have so much Halloween candy. It's insane. We've been,
you know, to only buy Halloween candy for others that you yourself would eat, right?
Oh, 1,000,000%, but that's okay, because they have like quote unquote variety packs that are just all manner of Reese's. So it's fine for me.
That's great.
But what were can you like highlight? I know you were bopping around. There was all these food trucks. Did you get to like try anything? Are people giving you like, hey, here's a slider? What are some of the food trucks or these places that are just popping up, like a few that you are just like excited about, like, or you think are like doing cool stuff?
Though I'm going to plug one group of food trucks and one group of food trucks only. We have an amazing Latino advocacy organization here in Nashville called Conexión Americas. And they have, within their wide-ranging span of programs, they've got a culinary incubator. It's called Mesa Comal. And somebody told me, I wasn't aware of it, so someone tipped me off to this early on in this World Central Kitchen process and said, you know, they've got in-house restaurants and food trucks So this, and then they also would obviously know where need is in the Latino community here in the Nashville area. And so they've been just this incredible one-stop shop, but they've got this posse of just amazing, amazing chefs who are making burritos with handmade tortillas and Colombian arepas and just amazing chorizo and cheese, sort of melted like panini kind of things that just, I didn't get to eat everybody's food because the food wasn't for me. It was for other people. But watching the joy that it was obviously bringing to these chefs and food truck proprietors to prepare food that's culturally appropriate. There's actually a story coming out in the Tennessean, which is our big local newspaper, on Sunday about this, and one of the distributions they went to go see was one of our food trucks from Conexion is called Two Peruvian Chefs in a Truck, and it's pretty clear cut what those guys do. But they're preparing chicken and rice and beans in a traditional way that families will enjoy. And we try to do that in all communities, right? So earlier this summer, we were preparing food for an organization that worked with a lot of Burmese and Central and South African refugees. And so, those communities don't eat a lot of fried food and they don't eat a lot of dairy. So we needed to find a restaurant that could cook something that was culinarily appropriate, culturally appropriate, ethnically appropriate for those diets. We've got a restaurant feeding an organization in our Muslim community here. We've got an immense Kurdish and Somali community here in Nashville, both of which are just some of my favorite people on the planet and are really starting to find their voice as Nashvillians to make this city a better place, which is great. We actually are first ever Muslim Metro Councilwoman. This is neither here nor there, but Zulfat Sawara, who's our first ever Muslim Metro Council member in Nashville. She was just elected. She's from Somalia. She last night was the driver behind a resolution that passed in our Metro Council to rename a big strip of our Fifth Avenue downtown as John Lewis Way. So awesome. I just, it's too much on every level, but if we're going to feed the Muslim community, right, that needs to be a halal kitchen. We can't just be like, hey, you make, you make pork belly and roasted Brussels sprouts, go feed them something. Like that's not going to work for a lot of reasons. So that's been great, but really just to watch, these food trucks that, and I think I mentioned a couple of them, are very new to what they're doing or are trying something new. We had one woman who brought out her taco setup for election day, and it was just gorgeous. And to see the tacos al pastor going out the door and know that I would not have time to drive over there and get one was killing me. But that kind of stuff is great too, because that's part of the point, right? We're helping these small businesses as well. And so even if it's just the experience of like learning how to invoice in one situation, I'm so thrilled to be able to be a part of that. So that takes one barrier away from growing into something down the road. I don't know if that answered your question.
It 100% does. And it just makes me so excited, or continually excited, about like food and America. And I'm a fucking goofball this week. I mean, I am usually anyway, but like, I don't know. It's just so like, who could ever hear that and be like, that's bad? Who could ever hear that and be like, fuck that? There should only be my kind of food that I like, just the general sort of like incuriosity that and kind of like racism and non-pluralism and shittiness. Like, and you hear that and you just go like, oh man, that's so fucking cool. And it's just like, I don't know. It just reminds me of there's my wife and I are huge Top Chef fans, and there's this chef named Casey who's been on a bajillion seasons of Top Chef.
Yeah, she's been on quite a number of times.
Yes, but she has, and she's gone back and forth in terms of what reality show archetypes she has kind of embodied.
Yeah,
but
she had a real bitchy that one time.
But she had him. Oh no! I mean, she's been, like I said, she's been embodied every role on the alignment chart of reality
Top
show
Chef
that you can have. Yeah. But she like had a moment on whatever most recent season that she was on where, you know, she was just talking about food and how it, you know, like connects with people and connects them to their history and to other people's history and bridges these gaps and all this different stuff. And she just had this moment in a talking head where she's like tearing up and she's just like, isn't food cool?
It is.
And it's that moment, you know, like it's that thing as you're describing where it's just like, isn't food cool? It's like all of the nexus of like in this week and like democracy and like pluralism and all of these different peoples and cultures and like learning about each other. That's
and
so
I think
cool.
I'm super like finally attuned to that, probably because I am from Houston, which gets overlooked a lot. But you know, if everybody hasn't watched the Anthony Bourdain episode down there, showcasing the sort of immense cultural diversity within Houston, Texas, you know, I'm very attuned to that idea of all kinds of different ethnicities and races and subsections of cultures living together in one place. And then I went to New York, which is obviously that. And then I went to LA, which is obviously that. And then I moved here to Nashville and I was like, oh, great, honky tonks. But then you take 30 seconds and you all of a sudden realize what just an amazing diaspora of people we have here too. And so I love when I'm able to talk to people about like, yes, in my program, I am working with Colombian and Mexican and Puerto Rico and, you know, third generation Black Nashvillians and a Greek guy who's making food for, you know, Kurdish refugees and a dude from Chicago who's making food for Burmese refugees. Like that, it's just this incredible tapestry of things. And it makes me so proud to live here. And I suspect, although I can't be sure because I don't know everything, although you'd think I do, I would suspect that there's something like that in everybody's town that they should go and find, because to tie it all back up in a bow, like it's your community and you should learn about it. You should learn who lives there and what they can bring to the table. And it's just going to make us better. It really is.
All right, that is it. That is all for this week's episode of Stay for Dinner. If you'd like to know more about the organizations that Whitney talked about, including Conexión Americas, you can check out the description of this show in your podcast feed. I will put a link in there. Please check them out. Thank you so much to Jason Anderson, who wrote and performed my intro music July 4th, 2004. My interstitial music is by Advanced Bass, the amazing Owen Ashworth. My podcast art is by Sarah Beacon, that is Becan. Thanks again to Whitney for joining me here on the show. And if you like hearing me talk, I've written a couple of novels, The Boy Who Couldn't Sleep and Never Had To and Crap Kingdom. They are available as audiobooks as well as regular books. Please support your local booksellers this fall or in winter. Help them get through it. This is going to be a tough time for everybody. Let's all help each other get through and stay safe and continue to do what we can. And that's about it. I will talk to you next week. Bye-bye. Oh, also, wait, real quick. You know the deal. They say at the end of every podcast, but sometimes I forget to. If you enjoy the show, please rate and subscribe to the show. It helps there be more show. Okay, seriously it now. Talk to you next week. Bye.